hang on one second. Hey, George, one second, I gotta get out of here. Close this. Okay, you are live. You are live.
Welcome everybody on YouTube tonight, and also those that are Zooming with us, all board members. Today is Tuesday, July 21st, 2020. It's a regular board meeting of the Norwalk City School District. Mrs. DuPont, roll call, please.
Mr. Linder?
Here.
Mr. Moore?
Here.
Mr. Ritzenthaler?
Here.
Mrs. Schnellinger?
Here.
Mrs. Wick?
Here.
Okay, if everybody would put their hand over their heart for the Pledge of Allegiance and recite that all together, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the
United States of America and to the republic for which it stands,
one nation,
under God, indivisible, with
Indivisible,
liberty and justice.
liberty, justice for all.
All right, section C is adoption of the agenda. We have a motion to adopt the agenda as we have received it.
I make a motion to adopt the agenda as it is.
Thank you, Mr. Linder. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Mrs. Wick. Roll call.
Mr. Linder?
Yes.
Mrs. Wick?
Yes.
Mr. Moore?
Yes.
Mr. Ritzenthaler?
Yes.
Mrs. Schnellinger?
Yes.
Oh, at this time, we're ready for the treasurer's report. Mrs. DuPont.
Okay, so the items we have for approval, we have 3 minutes to approve. We have our regular meeting, which was last June 9th. Then we had 2 special meetings, June 26th, July 2nd. Those are attached. Then we have the June 2020 financial reports. And I'm going to switch my screen to our financials. So we have closed out fiscal 20. We've finally started fiscal 21. Took a little longer this year to get closed with our new software. So let's just start right out with the bad news. We ended the year with a deficit of $697,104 in our general fund. We have almost $103,000 in encumbrances in the general fund. Encumbrances are purchase orders that have been placed and not yet paid. Since we're on a cash basis for the forecast, and financial statements are also on a cash basis, we want to make sure that the expense doesn't get shifted into the following year. So that's why we try to avoid ordering at year end, and also so that we wait so long in June to get the books closed, to get all of our invoices in. So we really ended the year, if you consider the negative 697 and the 103,000, it's about $800,000 that we ended negative for the year. So these are the comparative statements right here that every month you get. And this is kind of a snapshot of what the forecast looks like, because this is all just general fund dollars, right? So it compares your June of 2020 and your June of 2019, and then it also compares your fiscal year 20 to 19, which is the year before. So when you're looking at this, you're going to see that your taxes are all above for the prior year. I have to make my screen smaller. Your taxes are all above for the prior year. That's because they were already collected prior to the pandemic. We just finished this year's spring tax collection. I spoke with Roland, our county auditor. We should know soon what our delinquencies are. This is going to be our concern going forward on property tax. People and businesses not being able to pay. Then we have our state funding. We had a reduction in the last 2 months of fiscal 20 of $449,454. You'll remember that was part of the $775 million in reductions the governor ordered to balance the state's budget without the state having to dip into their rainy day fund. We had a slightly higher catastrophic cost reimbursement in fiscal 20 than 19. It was $73,000 in 19, $79,000 in fiscal 20. So that also shows in the state funding. So that's why we have a negative 441 instead of, like I said, the 449. Another place to note is the all other operating revenue. You'll see a big difference here. That's our Medicaid reimbursements. You'll see all other operating for year end, the annual difference, 168,000 in the negative. The red means negative. That's Medicaid reimbursements. In fiscal 18, we had 260,000 in reimbursements. In fiscal 19, we had 413,000. And last year in 20, we only had 176,000. So you can see why we had such a big difference there. We had two reasons for this. In 19, we had 2 years of prior settlements that we received in the same year because the Ohio Medicaid and Schools program was just way behind in processing. So they were catching up. The second is last year, there was a discrepancy on claiming. If a document didn't have the correct signature, the entire claims for the year were thrown out. The way Medicaid and Schools works is claims are filed by our therapists and then they're paid on an interim basis. Then we do a cost report, which applies our indirect costs. That gives us the amount that we add for administrative expenses. And then we do an agreed upon procedures, which is where we have basically an audit of the claims by CPA firm. Then we get a settlement amount. So normally you only receive one settlement amount a year, but in 19 we had 2 settlements amounts. So that's why it really is throwing it off. Those are pretty much our revenues for the year. You can see overall we came in $428,000 less from the prior year. And then we go down to our expenses. Salaries, of course, were pretty much flat because obviously we were closed for the last 3 months. The biggest one here is the purchase service expense. The largest increase, fiscal 19 to 20, open enrollment out, special education shared costs, and college credit plus. These 3 categories made for an increase over $500,000. And unfortunately, they are all out of our control as they are mandated costs. College credit plus, the CCP program, of course, open enrollment out, special education, those are all things that we're mandated to do. So there isn't much we could do about that increase. The fringe benefits, the increase there, the 195, that was basically just medical insurance. We haven't had an increase in dental or vision, but medical kind of makes up for it. And going forward this year, we have a 5% increase in medical. The next line, the negative supplies and tax, you'll see on the expenditure side, negative means that we did not spend as much. On the revenue side, it means it didn't have as much come in, but on the expenditure side, we didn't spend as much. So you see that supplies and tax, we spent quite a bit less. That's because, of course, once all this occurred, we started, we quit purchasing anything that we didn't absolutely have to have. Obviously, our supply costs are increasing going forward with the cleaning, the sanitizing, all of the new protections that we'll need. Hopefully we'll have some an offset with some of the special funding that's out there for that. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. And then the transfers and advances out, you'll see the $66,827. We did have to do the $60,000 transfer to the food service. It was in the negative. There's also the $2,000 transfer that we do every year to the newspaper that shows in there. And then we had $4,827, which is actually just an advance to finish the year end because we had 2 grant funds that were in the negative. So that's going to be coming back in fiscal 21. So technically the $4,827 really will be back. So that gets us to a negative $697,104 for the year in our general fund. Fortunately, we did have the district's rainy day fund that covered the deficit. But this is obviously unsustainable going forward. Changes will need to be made to try and stop the losses. And while I'm on the bad news, the governor announced our foundation reductions for the fiscal 21 school year. We will be cut another $449,454, the same as we were in fiscal 20. On the, to say it's a good side, because it really isn't, but on the positive side, I did have 5% reduction built into our forecast next year on top of the reduction that we had already received with the 449. So, I mean, it's early, we're only 21 days into the year. So I don't know, we may see our funding reduced yet some, but if it isn't reduced, then that will be helpful if we aren't, if we don't have that extra 5% of state funding loss. So, but like I said, 21 days, we'll see, we have a long year to go. Reminder, we did not receive any of the supplemental funding that was in House Bill 164 that was passed at year end to help some of the districts that mostly all went to wealthier districts. We will receive some CARES money from the governor. And I do have a list of that. The CARES money, there's $139,246 that we can use to offset some of the expenses we've had to purchase with the hand sanitizer, additional cleaning supplies, the face masks, the shields, plexiglass barriers, additional costs that we're trying to get ready for school to open safely. So guidance hasn't come yet on how we're to access the funding, although we have heard that the funding has to be for expenses going from the time the pandemic was declared a health emergency until this December. So we don't have extra time to spend it like we might with some of our other money. Statewide, the amount that was allocated to K-12 schools was $100 million. And you can see the average amount in Huron County per pupil was $54. The ESSER money is still out there. We don't yet have all the final guidance on it as of yet. We do have a treasurer's webinar with ODE on the 28th, so I hope to learn a little bit more about that. And that's pretty much all I have on the financial part. So then we'll move on. We have a then and now. Now this happens when our budgetary timeline gets mixed up. We thought we were done paying for students at the PEP school, but they were still having online instruction and we received a June bill. Anything that's over $3,000 needs board approval because it is outside of the correct procedures. The school bus bid, that's next. I wasn't sure this was actually still going to happen with the state's budget crunch, but it is still on. This is the first time the state has given any funding for school buses since 2009. A new school bus costs around $87,000. The state is giving us $52,233.82. Since we're in a financial crunch, we will only do one bus. We have been trying to do 2 buses a year to try and get our fleet back closer to being newer buses because the maintenance is so expensive on school buses. But we will only do one because we will have to pay the difference, whatever the bid comes in on this, figure it's probably going to be $30,000. Not every district received this grant. The state looked at the age of the fleets and it ranked districts by that, and then it awarded it, and we had to do a application for it. Next, we have our student fees, grades K through 8. $20 is the fee. That's the same that it's been in previous years. And of course, state law, there's no fees for free lunch students. Cafeteria prices, there is a slight increase in cafeteria prices. Since we participate in the federal lunch program, they have an equity tool that helps us determine our pricing so that it's equitable between what the federal government reimburses us. We were lucky to be able to do the seamless option when school closed, and we received reimbursement for those lunches and breakfasts that we gave out. Unfortunately, as I alluded to, we did have to transfer the $60,000 into the food service. So even with the summer seamless option, we still lost quite a bit of money in the food service fund. Then we have our advances to our grants funds for fiscal 20 year end, 587 preschool special ed and 599 the Title IV. These are just so that we did not end the year in a negative amount, and then they will be advanced back in to the general fund when the money is received this year. Finally, we have auxiliary disposal. These are St. Paul items that were purchased with state money. They are requesting to dispose of old textbooks and workbooks that are obsolete that they no longer use. And then we have our donations. This was all of the donations that made that graduation so good for the class of 2020 this year. You'll see we had quite a few on there. Mr. Bader with his in-kind donation valued at $25,000, and then Domino's Pizza, the boosters, Nowhere Concrete. We did have an anonymous donor that was kind enough to give money, but doesn't want their name out there. And Kathy Rube did some in-kind, and then the truck sales and service also did an in-kind. And that is all I have for this month.
Thank you, Mrs. DuPont. This time I'll take a motion to accept the treasurer's items, all the items.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Linder. Any discussion?
Yeah, Joyce, what is the reason? I mean, the state, it's the $494,000 that we're short from the state. What's the reason for this?
The number that they came up with, or?
Yeah, the number they come up with. Why? I mean, to me, with this COVID thing going on, we shouldn't be short $500,000 from the state. You would think they would be helping us out. We're needing extra stuff to get open schools up. And
Right.
why'd they come up with this number?
Well, it was every district, and they just used a pretty convoluted formula to come up with what each district was going to lose in state funding. They based it upon our operating expenditures, not actually on what the state supplied in state funding. I had sent an example. There was a school completely unlike ours that lost almost the same amount of money, even though they had totally different numbers. So it was really just a formula that the state used. The districts that were less wealthy received less of a funding reduction, but it also depended on how much money you receive in state funding. So we received probably 53% of our funding from the state. So for us, it was a large amount, but it wasn't that large compared to what is provided by the state, even though it was a large amount of money for us. The state did the reduction because they had to balance their budget, and they made a decision, the governor made a decision not to dip into their rainy day fund, and instead to balance the state's budget by reducing mostly schools, colleges, and I believe the other one was Medicare lost money. I can't really answer for why.
Yeah, we just passed a levy. So are we is this a deal? We're already in deficit spending. We're going to have to go back to a taxpayer type thing, or?
We have a deficit this year, but we did not have a deficit for at least the last 4 years. So fortunately, we have that money set aside, and that's what carried us through this year and what's going to carry us through next year. Now, if things don't change, we're going to have to do something. I don't think we're ready to talk levy anytime soon, because I just don't feel that's
I just think it's awful early to, with a tax levy. I don't know when it was passed, but it wasn't too long ago. But, it just seems awful early to be even deficit spending, but that's just
we're only deficit spending because the state reduced us in the last
Right.
2 months. I mean,
Looking at Joyce's email, because you had the amount that we lost, or 3%, and you were comparing us to Beechwood. And this is regarding the House Bill 164. Yeah. And then that no funding, nobody was greater than 6% from what I'm looking at your email here.
right. So that was the House
We
Bill
were
160.
3%.
Right. So for us, the $449,000 worked out to 3% of our state funding amount. What the governor sent out was that it was only a 1.6% cut, but that really wasn't valid because it looked at operating expenditures, and not all of our operating expenditures are state funded, because we're only 53%, give or take, state funded. But they were looking at all of our revenue, which would include tax levies. I mean, I completely understand. It's just that the state tried to balance their budget, and they, instead of dipping into their rainy day fund, they did it by reducing schools, colleges. But fortunately, passing the levy, that's kind of the way the levies work. When you pass the levy in the beginning, you have an extra money because you've just passed the levy. And then usually it levels off, and then you start to lose money because your funding is basically flat. The levy won't bring in more money. Property tax really doesn't go up by that much. But in those beginning years, when you have a little bit more money, you have to save it. You have to hang on to it, because this is what happens. You run out of money. You have a deficit year. And that's why you've got to have that savings so you can offset the deficit without doing a levy. I don't think a levy is something in our future. I think we just have to look at things really hard going forward. Look at every expenditure and everything that we can do. If we, but I don't think a levy's there yet. It's not there yet. But we do have to be careful.
I was just just wondering, but yeah, thank you. That's cool. That's good.
Anyone else? Okay, Mrs. DuPont, roll call on the treasurer's items.
Mr. Moore? Mr. Moore?
Yes, yes,
Mr. Linder?
Yes.
Mr. Ritzenthaler?
Yes.
Mrs. Snellinger?
yes,
Mrs. Wick?
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Fisk, personnel.
All right, under personnel, the first one, we have some unfortunate resignations. We have Mr. Carnum, who's our business teacher at Norwalk High School. We have Itzi, who is Leon, who is one of our educational assistants, our English language with our English language learners. And Ruth, who is riding off into retirement. We definitely wish her well, and we'll miss all three of these individuals as they've served the Norwalk City Schools very well during their tenure with us. Under employment, we have a few new teachers. We have Amy Smar, who is joining us, and Caitlin Smith, who will be joining us as well. We're excited to have them. They were both stellar candidates in their pool and really gravitated to the top of their the candidate pool that we selected and interviewed. Under extended time, the extended time days are all the same as we've used in years past. We had waited to approve these to make sure that we were going to get the permission to open school, and it looks like we are, at least making good progress there. So we're going to go ahead and approve the extended time for these individuals. We have our EPAC substitutes. As a reminder, they're paid on an as-needed basis based on when Molly's not available to cover different events that may occur in the EPAC. And number 5, again, these are supplemental contracts that we've held off on until we had heard from the Ohio High School Athletic Association that they were moving forward with sports for the fall season. So we're going to go ahead and approve those as the fall sports season for most of these sports begins August 1st. So we have our high school coaches, our middle school coaches, and then our special contracts would be individuals that are not licensed teachers for our district. And then we have our volunteers that we greatly appreciate the time and effort they put in on a volunteer basis to help our athletes and our teams be successful. And those are all of the items under personnel.
Okay, do we have a motion to accept all items under personnel?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Do we have a second?
I'll
Second.
second,
Mrs. Snellinger, was that you?
yes,
Yes. Thank you, Mrs. Snellinger. Discussion on this?
okay, George, on the coaches, did we get an understanding that if the season doesn't start, that it'll be prorated?
Joyce had added some language to the supplemental contracts. And if that does occur, we would have to go through the same process we did in the spring where we would need an MOU with the North Teachers Association to prorate those.
Oh, okay.
And as you said, Mr. Fisk, these are just fall coaches, no other coaches involved.
Yeah, just the fall. We want to wait for this winter and spring to make sure the reopening for all the schools in Ohio goes well before we approve those contracts for winter and spring.
Anyone else? Okay, Mrs. DuPont, roll call?
Mr. Moore?
Yes,
Mrs. Snellinger?
yes,
Mr. Linder?
Yes.
Mr. Ritzenthaler?
Yes.
Mrs. Wick?
Yes.
Okay, motion passed 5-0. Now we'll be in the section 4, superintendent's reports.
Under items for approval, we have our Norwalk City School District acceptable use policy. The only substantial change in that policy is the creation of email accounts for our K-3 students. Previously, this had been 4th grade and up, but this change is necessary due to our transition to Google Classroom, which will be our platform that we'll use for this upcoming school year, and for any remote learning that needs to go on based on situations that may arise. Number 2 is our contract with Fisher Titus Medical Center for our therapy services, and that's from July 1st through June 30th. Our contract with PEP, our Positive Education Program. This is the program in which when we have students that need an alternative placement for various special needs that they may have, This would be the program that we purchase seats in so that the students have an alternative learning environment if needed. And the last one's our contract with Midwest Regional ESC, and they provide our services for our vision impaired students.
At this time, I'd like a motion to accept the superintendent reports, section A, 1 to 4.
So moved.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Mrs. Wick. Discussion?
Do we, on the Fisher-Titus therapy, is that normally 2 years or is that a year on that? Should it be 2021?
That's usually a 2-year contract.
It is a 2-year? Okay.
Any other discussion? Roll call, please.
Stellinger,
Yes.
Mrs. Wick,
Yes.
Mr. Linder,
Yes.
Mr. Moore,
Yes.
Mr. Ritzenthaler.
Yes. All right, the next section is the Jumpstart 2020, section 5.
And Jumpstart 2020 is what I've kind of branded our reopening of our buildings after our closure last spring. So all of these elements are parts of the Jumpstart 2020 plan. And the first one I have for you there is our an emergency revision to our school calendar. As you know, we typically do this, and we did back in, I believe it was January, it was actually February, I believe, that we passed our original calendar. But based on some of the events that have occurred in the last few weeks and some feedback that I've received from a number of our staff members, I'm suggesting and recommending that we change our calendar for this coming school year. As you know, the decision to adjust our calendar is based on both our lack of air conditioning in 5 of our 6 buildings, in combination with the guidance from Governor DeWine on the use of face coverings for the reopening of school. So school will now start a week later. It'll start on August 31st for students. And hopefully this helps us miss what are traditionally the historically hot days in August. In addition to that change, I've also added an additional in-service day to beginning of the year to allow our staff more time to prepare for any of the various uncertainties that lie ahead with our reopening of schools. The next one then would be, I'm going to talk about in a combination, and I'm going to give you a bit of an introduction on all of these, and then I'm going to give Mr. Ream an opportunity to kind of dig down into a little bit deeper into any of the policy, any of the different areas that he'd like to point out to you. But in our reopening, and I'm going to talk about reopening and remote learning at the same time, I'd like to begin by thanking all the members of our Norwalk team that spent hours upon hours writing and oftentimes rewriting these plans. I'd also like to thank, we had 874 families complete our survey. When we went into that survey, I felt very comfortable if we got 400, that would give us a good direction of where our community wanted to go. But we far exceeded that in terms of getting double that with 874 surveys. The data that we got from that in the reopening guidelines and our staff input provided just exactly the direction we needed to complete this opening plan and to get us ready for the reopening of school on August 31st. Our team has done an excellent job creating this plan. It's a great balance, I believe, of the guidelines that we were given, the safe practices that we've researched, and our community's expectations. So in thinking ahead then, once we've discussed the reopening plan and approved it, tomorrow I'll meet with our administrators and we'll begin the process of taking this reopening plan and making it applicable to then all of the buildings within our district. And then no later than Thursday of this week, we'll release an enrollment link for families that would prefer to attend school remotely for this school year. Our remote plan, which is attached to the board agenda here, that anyone would like to read any of these items, they can go to our board agenda and they're attached. But our remote plan is designed to keep our students not only engaged with their education, but we're also working to make this plan so that our students in grades K-6 can also stay socially connected to their peers, which is a big thing that we learned over the last spring with some of that social interaction that was missing, with our K-6 students. Our 7-12 students, our feedback was that they preferred the self-paced approach to being able to work at different times based on their schedule. So our 7 through 12 model will use our Compass program, and those students will be able to complete their assignments on a self-paced type approach. As you know, our goal for reopening the schools is to come back 5 days a week in person with safety precautions in place. While we're eager to reopen our schools 5 days a week, we are definitely requesting the help of our Norwalk community to accomplish that. We ask that everyone please work together to reduce the community spread of COVID-19. Currently, based on our local 3-week trends, you know, a 5-day start, if we had to start today, would take a lot of discussion. You know, so we're holding off to wait. I'm hoping to make our official announcement of exactly what model we'll use in a week or two. That'll give us 2 weeks, you know, to see that our local Norwalk trends start going in the right direction so that we can assure that our students and staff are safe when we actually open school. But we're full speed ahead with 5 days a week in person, and, you know, a very robust remote option for anyone that's just uncomfortable attending. And the last item I have there is our face covering, or better known as masks, policy. As you know, we're required to provide the policy by the state to provide a face covering policy. We've worked to create a policy that's it's realistic, safe, and practical. You know, for this reason, we created a policy that allows for mask breaks, mask removal when social distancing guidelines are followed, and also, which I think is big for the heat that we're going to experience in our buildings, at least for the first couple of weeks, you know, staff and students are permitted to use a face shield in lieu of a face mask. So those are the topics I wanted to share with you concerning our reopening plan. And Mr. Ream, is there anything you'd like to add that I may have missed?
Let me unmute myself there. First of all, you know, I want to thank the team that I worked with that helped me kind of put that guide together. We did have a representation from every single school building, a combination of classroom teachers and administrators. And when we put that team together, I really sort of looked for people that may have differing opinions on how we should get started. I tried to look for folks that had kids either in our schools or other districts so they could bring that parent perspective to the table. So I kind of told those guys I wouldn't call them out by name, but I certainly, if they're listening, want to thank them for their time and their effort in helping steer this plan. When we put it together, we sort of made a commitment among the team that we would follow federal, state, and local guidelines as much as we possibly can. You know, we realized that none of us on the team were medical professionals, and so we agreed to rely on the professional organizations that typically guide us anyway. And then, as you saw when I emailed you the draft last week, we put together some guiding principles that in the event that we did have discussions or disagreements or debates or things like that on the committee, that we would refer back to those guiding principles to help steer us in the right direction. And number one guiding principle we set out there was, however we come back in the fall, the number one priority has to be trying to keep our students and our staff safe. You know, that's our moral charge from our community, I believe. In addition to that, we certainly have a legal and ethical obligation to do so as well. So what I've given the board is really a set of protocols, a set of guidelines that we can follow regardless of how we come back in the fall. And like George said, our goal right now, what we're really trying to work towards is a 5-day-a-week start with all of our students and staff in attendance. And then obviously those that choose to go online can do so. So that's what we shot for. Like George kind of alluded to there, tomorrow we'll meet with the administrators, and I'm going to ask them to do the same thing that we did as a district committee and form a committee within each building. You know, teachers, OPC members, whoever they feel best represents the concerns of their building. And then they'll go through that same exact process. They'll take our district guidelines and they'll break them down into the actual nuts and bolts of, okay, what does this look like at Main Street or Maplehurst or Pleasant or our other buildings? You know, as a committee that put together the guidelines for the district, we didn't feel that we could effectively cover all of our classrooms in 6 very different school setups. You know, at any given time, we probably have 120, 130 classrooms operating across the district, and there's no way you can put all of those little minute details in one comprehensive plan. So each school starting tomorrow then is going to take the guides that we've provided and turn those into actual functional plans for their building. Beyond that, really it boiled down to there's basically 3 things you can do to keep your students and your staff safe. You can socially distance people. When you can't socially distance, then you put on a face covering of some sort. And the third thing that you'll see in all of the recommendations from the state, federal, local level is you wash and sanitize your hands as much as possible. There's not a lot of secrets. It's not rocket science. I think if you look at plans across the state, ours hits that sweet spot right in the middle of doing enough to keep people safe, but being flexible enough that we can operate in a different variety of formats and a different variety of buildings. So I'm going to get off my soapbox there and kind of let the board discuss whatever you need to discuss, and we'll kind of go from there then.
Okay. Motion to accept Jumpstart 2020 items 1 to 4.
Well, I don't know, I'd like to talk about that school calendar just a minute, before we go and accept it. My question is, George, we talk about air conditioning. And I think myself, I was thinking about this and I talked to other people. What do you think about taking the high school, its air conditioning, and getting that, the high school started, getting that like a jump start, getting them started, just work the high school, see how it's going to go, and keep them kids graduating when they're supposed to. It would be like getting everybody started, getting everybody, you could work the bugs out of, and you're only working with the high school. What do you think about doing something like that?
Really, that's the first time that idea has been thrown out. So I would have to think about it a little bit more. Just off the bottom of my gut, we had a lot of difficulties last year. If you remember, we called my very first heat day, I think that I've ever experienced. I think, no, maybe it was the year before. We had that heat day where we closed our elementaries, but we left the high school open. It created some issues that really I hadn't foreseen, because then we had a number of issues with our hourly employees compared to our salary employees. And when we went to make up days, it really created some issues in terms of trying to get everybody and stay within everyone's contracted days. So I'm not inherently against it. That's the only thing I can really think of that would concern me. But I can look at that and see, and we can talk it over to see if that's something we could try to work out. But just off my gut, my concern would be having the high school and all the other buildings, basically on 2 different calendars, and then trying to make sure that we hit our minimum school year for everybody would be my only concern. But we'll kick that around and see if we'll kick the tires on it and see if it's something we could pull off.
Yeah, I think it'd be something that would be great for everybody to get before everybody gets started. I think it'd be something that everybody could see what we need, what bugs need worked out, or, and then when we go full bore, I think it would help, but this is an idea.
This definitely reminds me of why it would be nice to have a new building and get rid of our non-air conditioned buildings. And that would solve so many of our problems if we had 2020 buildings instead of 1910 buildings.
Mm-hmm. I've been trying to get that going for about 10 years now.
Okay, a motion to accept items 1 to 4 in the Jumpstart 2020.
Make a motion for the Jumpstart part of the superintendent's report.
Jumpstart 2020. Thank you, Mr. Linder. Do I have a second?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Any more discussion?
Yeah, George, a couple of things here. First, I'd like to thank you on your calendar for trying to keep the semesters as close as we can, as we asked you before. The second comment I have to make is on this whole thing, I really want to thank and commend you, Corey and Amy, for all the work and all the research that you have done to get something reasonable. I understand that there's someone posting on Facebook that you and the board have not done the research. And I want to point out to the public that that is not true. You have done exceptional in this, and you have gone beyond the call of duty, and I commend all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. I cannot take that credit. We the three of us have worked with a great team. We go all the way back to March. You know, the entire team at Norwalk City Schools has done a great job. You know, the teachers picked up the pace in March and created something new. Our OPSI staff has done an amazing job keeping everything going. From top to bottom, we're fortunate to have the people. People make everything easier, and we have good people.
I got one question.
The
I've got
hours
one
that we
question.
put in there. Hours and hours that all the employees put in. Wow. Go ahead, Steve.
I've got one question as far as, you know, you talk about checking temperatures of the students as they enter the school. How about as they get on the school buses? Are we doing something as when they get on the school buses, checking temperatures? Isn't it a little bit too late when they get to school and say they have a temperature? Is there something we need to be doing there?
Our operation committee talked about that a lot. And where we came down to our concern is a lot of the younger kids stand at the bus stops by themselves. So we got to the point where we, you know, if we had, say, a first grader standing at the bus stop on their own, then we wouldn't really have anything, that we couldn't turn them away. So we felt the safest option, and to make it uniform, was to get the kids to school so that we know they're physically safe. We'll isolate them at school if they have a fever, and then we'll contact the parents or guardians and try to find a way to get them home at that point. You know, so it was more of a safety.
Yes. So say the bus shows up, you checking temperatures, and you find that one of the students has a temperature. Now, would that whole bus be quarantine type thing?
Well, that's the reason we would use the masks on the bus, because we can't social distance on a bus, because it would take, it's just not possible economically or logistically to have enough buses to socially distance. So that's why we have the requirement to use the mask. From what we're told, that if we're using the mask and we keep the kids in, as close to a family unit per seat as possible, then we can hopefully avoid that situation where an entire bus would be exposed.
Good enough.
Anyone else discuss?
I have a couple of questions. For, I guess, the 5 days, the multiple choices, I guess, the options that we had in the survey. Now, are we doing all the options based on what the parents, what the families want to do? I guess I'm confused on that part.
Our goal going out of the gate is that we're planning for 5 days.
Okay,
but
so just trying to stick with one scenario then, and not trying to do all of them?
No, only if the conditions dictate. So the only thing that's going to take us off of a 5-day-a-week plan would be the local. What we're using for Norwalk is our 44857 zip code. So when you see the information coming out of the Huron County Health Department, we're just focusing on what is actually going on in Norwalk. And right now, our trends are trending up in terms of cases. And Mr. Hollinger said at our last meeting that that's predominantly due to community spread, not due to any one organization having an issue. So we're going to watch those numbers and those trends. We will factor in Huron County, because there are state requirements that will kick in if we go red or purple. We looked at trying to make some automatic decisions if the county goes red and Norwalk goes red, but there were too many variables. So we're just looking at the data. We're relying on, Mr. Hollinger's been giving us great data to help guide us. I go all the way back to March when I met with him prior to really all of this kicking off, when we had to determine what to do with our musical. He has been a great resource. He's always available anytime we have a question. His data has been solid. So we'll start on the 5-day-a-week plan. And the only thing that'll sway us from that is if in a week or two, we can't get these trends to start looking in a better direction, then we'll really have to sit down and decide, is 5-day-a-week the safest option for our staff and students, or should we then look at a hybrid and remote being our last option for everybody right off the bat? I'm hopeful that, a week or two of data, we get away from the 4th of July, that those trends will start to change. But we just got to keep an eye on the data and see where the trends take us. But,
Okay.
you know, I believe in my heart, I think we'll start 5 days a week, unless something, you know, really big happens, you know, in our town.
Okay. Now I know I've had parents ask me, um, if they have a waiver to sign, is there an option for that? Because I know that they want to ask these questions, so I told them I would ask on their behalf. As far as the mask wearing,
I asked I asked our attorney about the possibility of a waiver, and he didn't necessarily support those because he said as a public school, if somebody doesn't sign a waiver, you really can't exclude them from attending a public school. So his recommendation was to leave it as a dress code violation and address it through that manner.
okay, and I know, um, and everybody knows how I feel. I mean, I'm just, you know, blatant like that. And there are some staff and there are some parents that would like the opportunity to speak. This is actually our first time really discussing this whole thing. And I understand there, you know, the team and everything. But I guess I'm just concerned with the buildings because September's still hot. Are we going to have medical people there? I mean, they're passing out without masks as far as the heat extremities. I'm concerned about that part. And if we're not meeting in person, why are we allowing the students to meet in person?
Well, we actually just, if Dwayne doesn't mind me giving him credit, I looked into the ability for us to meet in person, and actually the 10-person limit still is still in effect in Ohio. So actually Dwayne advocated for our district and got the question to the interim director for the state of Ohio's health and made just that statement, said, I apologize if I paraphrase you incorrectly there, Mr. Moore, but he posed to Tim Hollinger, who took it to the state, the question, how can we have school, but we're not allowed to have a board meeting with an audience of more than 10 people? The executive director listened to that, agreed with the argument, and Mr. Hollinger gave us permission to hold an in-person meeting in August, as long as we follow social distancing precautions. So we are allowed to go in person. And I believe if school is starting, I would highly recommend that we set the pace and we come in person come August.
Okay. Now, as far as the 10 limit, that's just as far visitors? Is that?
But it was
the 10
audience.
limit?
It was audience
Okay,
member.
because we had EHOVI, we had our meeting last month or last week actually, because I keep forgetting we're still in July. And we have more than 10 people. So that's why I'm just want to clarify that part.
I assumed it was audience, but it's probably people in general. So, you know, so Mr. Moore actually got the executive director listened to that argument and agreed and allowed for us to be considered into, I think it's the governmental group that's allowed to have an audience larger than 10. So we received that exemption and we can go in person in August. And I definitely think if school's starting, then, you know, we should be meeting in person as well.
George, when I approached him, he said the 10-person limit included the board members at first, and that's why I posed the question to him. And then, like you said, he took it all the way to the state, and then called me back and said we are permitted as long as we do the 6-foot rule somewhere in the gym or somewhere. We are permitted to do it. The other thing too, in regards to the face mask, I agree the face masks are hot, and I wouldn't want to wear one either all day. However, like George says in his statement, these shields is 1,000% better because, in fact, I wore a shield all day yesterday just to try it, and it's cool. It's people can see the teacher's face, the student's face. In fact, my wife even made a comment that I think that the grade school kids especially would have a ball getting a shield and maybe even decorating it, you know, something that's not real obscene or anything, but you know, it'd be kind of neat for these kids for doing that. I personally went out and bought 14 boxes of shields, and the faculty found out I had them, and I got 1 box left. They're all coming back. The faculty wants the shields. They definitely want to use them. and they're all gung ho for them. And I had one.
Is there
one
any way,
administrator say,
is there any
"This
way
would be
for the
good
students to get
for the
them?
kids."
Yeah, is there any way that we can have the students have them? Because not every family is going to be able to go out and afford to buy them. And I didn't know with our makerspace, I know that, you know, they had created the bands and that. I mean, is there anything that we can do as a school district to provide those instead for all the students?
I can share with you, Lisa, that one of the things that Corey and I have spent a number of days doing is wearing face masks on the second and third floors of our buildings. We spent a lot of time sitting, you know, like he said, we were doing some social distancing, you know, practice with the desk in the buildings. We sat on the third floor of League today with all the windows closed, the door shut. Because if we're going to ask people to come back, I wanted to feel what it felt like to sit in a mask. And I would tell you, it's exactly what you would think it feels like. You know, 85 degrees outside, and I didn't check to see what the temperature was inside, but it was hot.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and then I switched to the face shield to see if there was a desirable. I predicted that it would be much more comfortable to wear the face shield. I think, and it confirmed to me that that's a great option. You know, while there is some debate as to which one is more effective, a mask, a shield, are they equal? I think where we get ahead with a shield is we'll get better effective use of the shield. Because it's not so hot, you're not going to mess with it. You can talk, it doesn't slide around. You know, I practiced coughing in it to kind of feel where the air went. It feels like the air goes up your head instead of down and around. Obviously, I'm not a researcher, but that's just what it felt like to me. They're definitely more comfortable. I think our staff can now engage better with the kids because so much of teaching is your facial expression, you know, and being able to see you. You know, from a sourcing perspective, we had already sourced enough masks or face shields for our entire staff. And Corey and I decided today that we directed Kelly to try to find enough face shields for our K-8 students so that we could at least give them one. You know, we haven't decided if it's probably safer to leave it at school because if you've used one of those face shields, they're kind of flimsy. So we wouldn't want them to break them and go through them quickly. But that is our goal, is to provide each student with a face shield, and then they can determine as a family, do they want to wear their cloth mask or would they rather wear that? You know, I could see where, at least when it's hot, the majority of the kids wearing the face shield, and then maybe if they like the mask, maybe switching to the mask when it gets a little cooler, or really it comes down to whatever the child can tolerate, whichever they tolerate the best. You know, I've practiced with my daughter who's 4, having her wear a mask. I've ordered some face shields that, you know, are kid size to see how she does with that. But, you know, I would encourage parents to let their kids try both and, you know, send them outside when it's hot and, you know, see which one works best for them. So in a long answer to your question, yes, we're trying to find and source about 2,000 face shields so that we can provide those to the students so they at least have one to go off of.
Okay. Well, that's good to know.
Yeah. Okay. I might add too, George, you know, I got those masks up at Sam's. They're out right now, but they're supposed to be getting more in. But they had one of the best deals I've seen yet. They had four shields to a box for only $4.99. And I think that's probably a really good deal if any parents out there want to keep checking Sam's.
Anyone else?
Yeah, one question. We start playing football and we start having games. What are we doing as far as the fans going to the games? What is there anything put forth for that yet, or is that something we have to work on yet?
Well, as the Ohio High School Athletic Association released, I think it was last week, anything to do with sports, having kids participate in sports is all a local decision. The only thing Ohio High School Athletic Association is going to lead us on are the tournaments. So at this point, you know, we've had that conversation with Huron County Public Health and Mr. Hollinger, but we still, as a county, we haven't heard much on that. I know Josh has been talking to the SBC ADs. You know, they've been trying to come to an understanding on it. I think we're just not there yet as to how that's going to proceed. you know, as the property owner, we would be responsible for any kind of social distancing that's required in the stands. And that's a little disconcerting to me as to how you'd go about trying to get 3,000 people to socially distance in stands. I think that's a strong ask. You know, so I don't even have a prediction as to what, you know.
I mean, our
sports will look like.
professional sports aren't having any fans. I mean, it's kind of weird seeing it on TV. Nobody's sitting out there. And I guess they're just using audio for screams, a crowd. Because I haven't really paid attention to the athletic part of it. Do they have to wear face coverings and stuff? I guess I'm with the sports. I know they're all different. What are their requirements versus the kids going to school and them playing sports?
There's a variety. For the most part, to be kind of general with it, it's when they're competing, they're not using any sort of face coverings. And Corey, you may remember some of these better than I do, but I believe when they're not competing, there are some requirements to either distance or wear a face covering. Does that sound familiar to you? I've been focused more on the academic side and really relying on Josh to keep me up, and he's done a pretty good job with that. But I believe that's the expectations when you're competing. You're not wearing one, but when you're either on the bench or on the sidelines, there may be some requirements, but we haven't gotten that far since we're not to that phase. So I've been kind of focused, you know, on the school side.
Right.
Anyone else? Okay, Mrs. DuPont, roll call.
She fell asleep. No.
Unmute, Joyce.
Sorry. I had to check who was my first and my second. I got all these notes and I didn't know who. Mr. Linder,
Yes.
Mr. Moore,
Yes.
Mr. Ritzenthaler,
Yes.
Mrs. Schellinger,
Yes.
Mrs. Wick.
Yes.
Okay, items for information, the Hovey News.
Well, like I said earlier, we had our first board meeting last week. We had it in their auditoriums. That's why I was kind of confused on the number of people, because we had more than 10. And I know each county is different too. With my business being in Erie County and living in Erie County, the health departments have been opposite on some things. So we're just basically talking, they're going to supply masks. I'm hoping it's not the same mask that we had to wear just going into the building, because that was hot, the fabric that they used. But with this face shield idea, I'm going to contact Chris on that, just because I just think that's just makes more sense as far as being comfortable. It's hard to concentrate when you're hot. But I don't really have anything else. Everything's still moving along. I know they're concerned about all the districts, is, you know, everybody being different, and then the busing and that. So, I mean, we just all have to work together, basically.
Anything for legislative report? Okay. Nothing there? Okay, George. Anybody have anything else to discuss tonight before we adjourn?
Yeah, I got one thing I'd like to just hit on in regards to the Dr. Goodsite lawsuit. When reading the newspaper, I felt it made it sound like a disgruntled employee suing the district and administration and board had no wrongdoing. Well, that's not true. To anyone that worked beside Dr. Goodsite will contest she was one of the most loyal and dedicated employees a district could have. She was in the office many evenings till 8 or 9 o'clock at night, and you don't see that anymore, and was a big reason this district was excellent with distinction at one time. Even though her superiors were lying to her about being promoted more than once, she still kept her head up and continued to make her superiors and board look good. I saw that myself. Her evaluation is legal paperwork. Her evaluations and legal paperwork are public record, and you can see how all these supposed pillars of the community lied to her and how biased they were to her. There's a powerful quote by C.S. Lewis. Integrity is doing the right thing, even when no one is watching. Unfortunately, it is now public record and proven that supposed pillars of this community do not have integrity. Ralph Ritzenthaler and I were in a Saturday meeting when all board members agreed to offer Dr. Goodsight that superintendent job. And over the weekend, 3 board members manipulated Will Folgers to do the job after board president already told Dr. Goodsight she was the next superintendent. The Sunshine Law evidently didn't pertain to those 3 board members. My question is, why does the state have such a law if they don't enforce it? The Good Old Boy Network needed to stop. Dr. Goodsight didn't do this only for herself, but for the current and future employees of the district. And I haven't seen this type of behavior since. With this being said, I was very disappointed with 2 of our board members' votes. I believe their votes were influenced by others and the lack of review of these critical documents.
Well, I know you're regarding to Beth and myself. I don't know the details of it. We weren't part of it, so we didn't feel comfortable with it. That's our reasoning behind it. I will still stand by how I voted. I won't speak for Beth. I'll let her speak for herself. And as far as, I don't know what the rules are. I mean, I thought there was a gag order. I don't know. I mean, it's done. It's public. I don't know. So I haven't said a word, and because I don't know anything, and leave it at that.
I abstained because I was not part of it at that particular, this is just my 2nd year of being on the board. There's a lot of legal documents, and the lawyers looked at it on both sides, and that was a recommendation. That's why I abstained. And it's a gag order. I have not said anything to anybody about anything.
Okay, George, I'd like to make a comment. I wasn't going to, but after the meeting, I contacted OSBA lawyers. Again, I was not part of the board. So if you take that reasoning, then I should have also abstained. But I had the same documents everybody else had. I read them. I read the court documents. I read the depositions. And anybody that read them should have had a yes or no answer. That's how I feel. The lawyer told me there's only 2 cases that you should abstain: conflict of interest and not enough information. I feel we had plenty of information given to us by the lawyers and by everybody else. And I'm sorry. Thank you.
And I spoke to legal advice as well. And I know that you had worked with her, so I assume that was your position there. I don't feel that we have to defend how we voted on that. And that's where I stand. Thank you.
I agree with Lisa. I don't have to defend why I voted the way I did.
Well, I agree. You don't have to defend nothing, but here's the thing. I myself, I contemplated on voting no. But the district, I looked at it, the district would have went to court. This could have cost the district big money. If I would have known you guys were going to abstain, I would have voted no, and this would have went to court. But that's one thing I was looking at as far as the district. This is as cheap as we can get through with this thing. So I think for information, I think we need to, and hopefully this never happens again. And I think this, like I say, that's why the suit went on. It's not just for Sue Goodsight, it's for the future and employees of the district. And there's been a lot more cases of sued than just Sue. I've seen a lot of this behavior go on through other employees where they put them in places where they know it's going to irritate them, and hopefully they leave the district. And that happened even when I was on the board. So, we as administrators, board members, we need to, watch what we're doing so this doesn't happen again is all I'm saying.
And if I could just say that, I agree that, at least since 2015, I wasn't part of, a lot of what happened there. But we've worked hard to do exactly what you've said there, Steve, is to make sure that we're giving people the honest chances they deserve, that they earn. And that's been our approach. We can't change the past, as a current administration, but we can affect the future. And I think if there's a silver lining from this issue is that we as a board and administration, we have to work hard together and make sure that we're doing the best for the district and staying focused on treating everyone fairly, doing right by people, doing right by our great employees, our great team that we have, and, you know, making the best district that we have. And, you know, I think we have, you know, 5 individuals that can come together and, you know, we can do a great job, you know, for Norwalk City Schools. And, you know, just showing what we've done during this pandemic is a, you know, as a leadership team, you know, all of us together, you guys, you know, our central office, Joyce, you know, our principals, our teachers, everybody in our organization has done such a great job coming together and really doing the best that they can for the kids in Norwalk. And, you know, I look forward to being able to put this behind us so that, you know, we can make sure that things like this don't happen again.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'd like to just not defend, but explain why I voted yes. You know, Ralph might be able to help me on this, but if we had turned that settlement down, we would have been responsible for the whole thing, according to what we were told ahead of time, even with the meeting that you were in with us. And I wasn't going to take that chance and have us settled for a lot more than $2,500. The last thing I want to mention is, I don't care how you vote, I don't care what your thinking is. When we leave here as a board, I want the board to be unified and defend each other. I don't care whether you agree with it or not, but at least be unified. That's how I feel.
Anyone else? Okay, do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Do we have a second? I'll second that. No more discussion. Roll call, please.
Mr. Moore,
Yes.
Mr. Ritzenfeller,
Yes.
Mr. Linder,
Yes.
Mrs. Dellinger,
Yes.
Mrs. Wick.
Yes.
Okay, we're adjourned. Have a good night, everybody.
Have a good night.
Take care. Bye.